Welcome to the first episode of Valley Girls Dish. I'm Abby Tusterberg, and our first guest is going to be Emily Lyon-Hansen, my mother, and the co-owner of Dish in the Spoon Cafe. Today we're going to be making our very popular raspberry cream pie. Mom has mastered the art of a very flaky crust that we use in our pies and also in our quiche at the cafe. Mom, if you would talk us through the crust.
I would be happy to. It's kind of fun. This is my grandma's recipe modified, and I've also borrowed ideas from different sources to make it scientifically doable. So we're going to start with 2.5 cups of flour, which has already been measured, and this is just regular all-purpose flour. And we're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar, and we're going to add half a teaspoon of salt. And I often double this recipe, so if I make a mistake in the quantities, I'll correct it. But that's basically for 2 crusts. And I whisk both ingredients together. Now, some people put this in the refrigerator and keep it cold because they like all the ingredients to be cold, and that's a great idea. In fact, the shortening that we're using and the butter that we're using have been in the refrigerator and are fairly cold as we go. So I'm going to add now a half a cup of shortening.
You can also use lard, right?
You can. Traditionally, in my family, my grandma had home rendered lard and they used it, and I have used lard, but for dietary reasons and people's preferences today in a modern society.
We're vegetarian friendly.
We're being careful. Yeah, I am using cold butter, and I'm just going to place the cold butter right here. But I'm going to do something that people don't often do. It's really cold. I want it to stay cold, but I'm going to use a grater. And I'm going to grate the butter into the flour mixture. It keeps it cold, but and the pieces of butter stay together, because what we want to end up with is not a homogeneous kind of dough or pastry. We want it marbled, and we want the pieces of butter.
You'll actually be able to see the butter still in the crust as you blend it together.
Right.
And if you knead it too much, then that affects how fluffy and flaky the pie shell becomes.
Exactly. So this doesn't take very long, and I just push it through the grater, and then I take my scraper and scrape as much of it back in as I can. And then I do take my pastry cutter, and excuse me just a second, I'm going to reach for the towel in my hand. I'm going to take my pastry cutter and cut the shortening and butter into the dough. And I want to do this fairly rapidly and keep the dough as cold, or the ingredients as cold as I can, so that doesn't get too soft and start to form a warm mass. So we want to keep it cold. Now, Abby, I think if you would reach into the cooler, this will take just a couple more seconds. They say pea-sized pieces of cut-in butter mixed with the flour. Mine may be a little coarser than that, but not much. And I just want to make sure that I have most of it cut in, and it's going to look, you can see, it's going to look like coarse crumbs. And some of the pieces are a little bigger than others, but I don't want to overdo it. Now the next thing is a secret ingredient that I learned from one of the cooking shows on television. It's my post-secondary education.
It also makes cooking in the kitchen a little more fun.
For everybody but me. Well, the next thing I want to do is measure a half of a cup of very cold
We keep it in the
vodka.
freezer.
And it doesn't have to be a high-quality vodka. Yeah, we keep it in the freezer and just... And I'm going to use a half a cup. Make sure I got the right amount.
Is that the right amount for a half?
For half the cup. Nope, you're right. It's a fourth of a cup. So I'm going to just...
She just likes a lot of vodka.
I told you I doubled this recipe out. So I'm going to only use half of the cup, a fourth of a cup. And I'm going to sprinkle this around. Now, the reason that scientifically we use...
And then I'll just keep the
No,
rest
you
for me.
will not. The reason they use vodka is that it doesn't form a gluten with the flour, and it keeps the crust tender as well as flaky. But they do finish it off with cold, ice-cold water. So I have water that is in a chilled measuring cup with ice, and I'm going to sprinkle some of that.
And you prefer the water over milk. Sometimes you can use milk in the crust, but you think the water works better.
Yeah, in my old days, I used milk, but I think the water does work better. I think the proteins in the milk sometimes may add to a tougher crust. It's easier to work with, I think, but it's tougher. So I'm going to carefully strain in just a little stream part of the water. And it's not an exact science, unfortunately. I can't just give you a quantity of ice water.
We got into a little argument about this. I wanted to give you an exact amount so that it was easy at home, but my mom said that the secret to a really flaky crust is kind of getting to know your crust and working with it and experimenting and just adding enough. And depending on the temperature of the butter, the temperature of the room, really depends on how much liquid you have to add. So I tried. I was vying for an easy recipe, but you have to kind of tweak it a little bit for home.
I try not to use my hands too much when I'm putting the water in because it warms it up, and I don't want that to happen, obviously. So I kind of get to a point where it looks a little like this, and there are pieces of dough that are starting to hold together, and there are still dry parts of the ingredients down at the bottom. And at that point, I sprinkle just a tablespoon, maybe a teaspoon, at the bottom and mix that up a little bit. And then I am going to use my hands, but I'm only going to use my hands just to test how mixed and combined the ingredients are. And I'm going to use this to scrape all of this off. And now I'm going to fold these ingredients together, and it looks perfect. It's just crumbling enough to hold it together, but if I push it together, it stays into and starts to form a ball. And I am only going to toss this maybe 3 or 4 more times. 1, and I'm going to push down and pick up the dry ingredients and form a ball. 2, 3, 4, we're almost done. And then I'm going to put this into the refrigerator if I'm not going to work it into a pastry right away.